Hello everyone. Today we're going to look at Chapter 3, The Foundation of Indian Society to 300 CE. So I want to start by showing you a map of India and this is the general area that we're talking about. You can see there in green, it's going to be one of the first civilizations that we talk about is the Harappan civilization. But also just take a quick look here at the arrows that are drawn on this map showing you the summer monsoon winds and then the winter winds. Remember the subcontinent of India along its southern border, it's surrounded by ocean. Along the northern border is the Himalayan mountains. So the subcontinent of India, it has a very varied geographical terrain and great biodiversity. India for the most part is warm with monsoons that sweep in from the ocean to the Himalayan mountains on the northern border. Those Indian populations we saw there in the green on the previous map began along the Indus and Ganges rivers, where the land was conducive for agricultural production. The Indus Valley population was identified as the literate Harappan civilization. Harappan cities were craft and trade centers where manufacturers produced cotton cloth. And some major cities within the Harappan civilization include Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. The reason for the Harappan civilization's decline, we're still not really sure what happened. Could have been a series of things, but no one really knows. Just to give you an idea of some of just the well thought out and well planned cities of that civilization, this is Mohenjo-daro, and you can see, look how well planned it is. I mean, even though these are just ruins, you can see it's very symmetrical looking, right? So we know that this is a very well advanced civilization just by looking at the ruins themselves, not to mention the wealth of knowledge that they did leave behind that we can study. So we have that civilization decline. We still don't know the reasons why. So we're going to move into another civilization that we see start to rise during about 1500 to 500 BCE, known as the Aryans. And Aryans were a dominant people in North India following the decline of the Indus Valley civilization. The source of information on the Aryan civilization comes from the Rig Veda, a collection of Indian hymns, ritual texts, and philosophical treatises. The Aryan success was due to their superior military technology, and warriors in the tribe, they elected the leader, and that leader was known as the Raja. Following the warrior class, the priest made the next social class. They supported the growth of the royal power in exchange for power and status. The Aryan priest class, they became known as the Brahmins, and non-Aryans fulfilled the menial task in society, and they were subordinate under the Aryans. And just to give you an idea of where we're talking about here, because we're going to talk about some Indo-European migrations and going into parts of Europe. Specifically, think about Greece coming into India. You've probably heard of Alexander the Great and his conquering of the far western part of India. But we have this Indo-European homeland and coming into contact with the Aryans and with other peoples of the subcontinent of India. So you can see the spread of Indo-European speakers, of course, barely coming into this Aryan society, but also moving out and going across Europe. So what we see is the Aryans beginning a class system that evolved into the Indian caste system that divided the society into strictly held social levels. And I don't have it here, but what I will do is I will go in and list all of these for you that I'm about to call out so that you have just a better idea of the different levels of this caste system. So the caste levels, they're called Varnas, which included the Brahmin. Those are the priests, they're at the top. Then you have the Kshatriyas. Those are the warriors and officials. Then you have the Vaishya. Those are your merchants. And the Shudra. Those are your peasants and your laborers. And the upper Varnas consisted of nearly 30% of the overall society. The Aryans were patrilineal and patriarchal. and the roles of women were more subordinate than those of women in southern India. However, earlier Indian societies offer greater liberties than they would later on. So just know, earlier societies, women had a lot more liberties and could do more. As we go forward in time, they're more subordinate and stricter control. There we go. Let's talk about Brahmanism really quickly. Indians interacted with their gods through the actions of the priests, who were the only members of society who could perform the ceremonies. The meanings of these sacrificial rites were recorded in the Upanishads, and ancient Indian cosmology theories included samsara, the reincarnation of souls, and the karma, the tally of good and bad deeds that will determine the status of the next life. So I'm going to switch over. We're going to talk about India's great religions, and the first one of those is Jainism. Vajramana Mahavira is the influential individual behind the development of this religion of Jainism. Mahavira moved the concepts of karma and reincarnation into a different direction, arguing that living and inanimate objects all have living souls. Jains considered all life sacred and believed it should not intentionally be destroyed. And although it's not one of India's major religions, Jainism did become influential in Indian thought. The next religion we're going to look at is Buddhism. And Siddhartha Gautama became known as the Buddha, meaning the enlightened one. The optimistic message of Buddha was all people can set on the Eightfold Path toward liberation and the Four Noble Truths. So I've outlined the Noble Truths for you here. Noble Truth 1, pain and suffering, frustration, and anxiety are the ugly parts of human life. Noble Truth 2, suffering and anxiety are caused by human desires. Noble Truth 3, people can understand these weaknesses and triumph over them. And Noble Truth number 4, one must follow the simple code of conduct to make the triumph identified in Noble Truth 3. Okay. Those who achieve the liberation of the Eightfold Path will achieve the state of nirvana, a state of blissful nothingness and freedom from reincarnation. Buddhism differed from Brahmanism and Hinduism because it ignored the caste system. Buddhists followed scriptures called sutras. They were written teachings of the Buddha. Buddhists developed different traditions that stressed different sutras. Mahayana was one of the different traditions identified as the Great Wheel, and this form was more inclusive. Okay, and we're very briefly and quickly going to discuss Hinduism. Hinduism teaches that the Vedas are sacred texts that rest on the adherence of the caste system. Followers of both Hinduism and Buddhism needed to observe the moral law identified as Dharma. A central Hindu text is the Mahabharata, an ancient epic which details men and gods engaged in fierce battles. A later part of the text, the Bhagavad Gita, offers guidance on ethical problems. This is just a depiction of the god Vishnu for you. Those of you that are from India are probably very familiar with these different religions, and you're probably very familiar with the significance of all of them. Just remember, this is just a brief introduction to Westerners and a brief overview to Westerners of the different great religions of India. We'll go back and discuss India in more detail as we get further into the semester. So what about Western contact? What exactly happened when these Westerners came in? How did that change parts of India? So we do have turmoil developing as Persian Emperor Darius entered the Indus Valley and the region of Kashmir. Indians adapted the Aramaic writing script, and Persian control was overrun by Alexander the Great, who entered the Indus Valley and other rival states. Alexander followed the Indus south, hoping to find the end of the world. Unfortunately, as we all know, his men mutinied and refused to continue, and forcing the leader to turn back. But we do have some influence, some Western influence in Indian art. Here's just an example for you. You can kind of tell that Greek-Roman influence, the Hellenistic influence, especially with the curls of the hair, the different facial features that are so drastically different than what we find in India. So we're going to read, or you're going to read, I'm going to talk just a little bit about how Chandragupta and the founding of the Mayuran Empire, how that void that was kind of left after after Alexander and his guys left. So Chandragupta ruled a state in the Ganges Valley, and capitalizing on the crisis caused by Alexander, he was able to expand his holdings throughout northern India. So the empire was organized into provinces, and members of Chandragupta's family became the governors of those provinces. Kautilya, Chandragupta's minister, stressed that the leader should seek the enemies of his enemies and make them good allies. The king presided over court sessions, claimed the mines and forests, and controlled most aspects of society. Just to give you an idea here, you guys probably know, or if you don't, I love maps. So the furthest extent of the Persian Empire, you can see it right here, this blue line. Furthest extent of Alexander's conquest, in the orange there. This is the Mayuran Empire. We're going to talk about Ashoka's travels in a few minutes. So now we will talk about Ashoka. So the reign of Ashoka from about 269 to 232 before Common Era. So he is the grandson of Chandragupta, and he served after he rebelled against his older brother. And after conquering Kalinga, Ashoka was remorseful about the horror of war. Go back and read like how many people were slaughtered in that, and just the taking over of Kalinga. And it'll make more sense why he so quickly converts. But he converted to Buddhism and spread the religion throughout India. With Buddhist thought, Ashoka ruled with compassion, nonviolence, and an adherence to Dharma. And he remained a watchful ruler of the Mayuran Empire. He built roads and rest spots and improved communications. And after his death, the Mayuran Empire went into decline. So what we start to see, no one can really support a huge empire. We start to see smaller states emerging and these trading networks emerging. But following the collapse of the Mayuran Empire, foreign powers controlled the Indus Valley. Migration patterns brought numerous non-Indian populations into the area, and many of these foreign populations brought their cultures and education with them, creating a vibrant change to India. During this time, the Indian laws were codified under the Code of Manu, which presented family, caste, and commercial law. So just to kind of summarize it all up for you, civilization first emerged in the Indus River Valley of India in the 3rd millennium BCE. The large cities of the Harappan civilization were carefully planned. We saw a picture of one of those cities. A few centuries later, the Aryans, speakers of an early form of Indo-European language, rose to prominence in North India. In the beginning around 500 BCE, we have the 3 of India's major religions emerged. Then we also have, contact with the West, with contact with Persians and Greece in the 6th century BCE and 4th century. And they brought with them new political techniques, ideas, and art styles, as well as the use of money. And then shortly after the arrival of the Greeks, much of North India was politically unified by the Mayuran Empire. But after the decline of the Mayuran Empire, India was politically fragmented for several centuries. Indian cultural identity remained strong, however, because of shared literature and religious ideas. And I know this was a very, very quick, brief overview of India, but don't worry, we're going to come back and talk more about India and the greatness of the subcontinent of India as we move forward in this class.